Well, it certainly is a pleasure to tell you a bit about today's speaker, Brian Booth. Mr. Booth is a Roseburg, Oregon native who graduated from the University of Oregon in economics and then obtained his law degree at Stanford, where he was an editor of the Stanford Law Review. He practices law here in Portland as a partner at Tonkon, Torp, Galen, Marmaduke, and Booth. I thought if I said that a little faster, I might get a job as a secretary. I love these lawyer phone calls where they very rapidly chant off these names of law firms. His civic contributions, however, have been so substantial that it is actually difficult to understand how he's managed to earn a living. Brian's leadership in Oregon's art community has changed the state. He founded the Oregon Institute of Literary Arts and went on to create the Oregon Book Awards and Oregon Literary Fellowships. He's been a prominent regional voice for free speech. And in asking him if he is an author, I learned that he has written a book which is titled Wild Men, Wobblies, and Whistlepunks, Stuart Holbrook's Lowbrow Northwest. So that sounds irresistible, and I suspect that if you speak with him, you could find out where you could get a copy. But the exciting thing about Brian is that without being a primary author or a primary artist, he has had such an incredible impact on the arts community. He co-founded the Oregon Cultural Heritage Commission, has served as president of the University of Oregon Art Museum and of the Portland Art Museum, whose present success he helped to craft. He has sat on numerous other boards, including those at the Oregon Community Foundation, Reed College, Planned Parenthood, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and even the OHSU Foundation, which he chaired. No surprise that he received the Stuart H. Holbrook Award for Outstanding Contributions to Oregon's literary life in 1996, and will receive, with his wife Gwyneth, the 1997 Tom McCall Leadership Award. Since 1990, Brian Booth, working in yet another arena, has brought his love of Oregon's physical beauty and his real feel for its creative heart to bear as the first chair of the Oregon Parks and Recreation Commission. He has championed preservation of our park system, and today he will describe the history of our parks and what state funding cuts can mean to their integrity. Please join me in welcoming Brian Booth.
Thank you, Fran, and good afternoon. It's a beautiful day to be in a park, state park. I read where the governor and the Republican leadership were going to have a budget summit this weekend, but they couldn't agree where to hold it, and I was going to suggest they go to Silver Falls State Park. I think it'd be a good place to have good feelings and maybe do good things for Oregon. Well, almost exactly a year ago, the Parks Commission voted to close 65 of our 220 parks and lay off 10% of our staff because of lack of funds. It was a sad day for Oregon and its citizens, the saddest day in the proud history of Oregon State Parks, and an admission that quality of life was no longer a high priority for state government. At the commission meeting, Jody Kalika, who is our representative from Eastern Oregon, he lives in Warm Springs, spoke for all of us when he said, "I guess it kind of hurts my heart and my spirit to take this action." The Parks Commission has had a consistent message since it was formed in 1990. This is a time of record prosperity for Oregon, rapid increases in population and tourism, and recognition that livability is a key to economic development and a key reason why we all live here. So it's terribly short-sighted to force a downsizing of our park system. We should be adding parks, not closing them. But the first three legislatures in the 1990s cut state support of parks, cut it by 55% to $2.6 million a year, or only 8% of our budget. In other terms, State parks got 7 cents out of every $100 of taxes, less than $1 per Oregonian. These actions forced us to run the department primarily on fees, user fees, day use fees, camping fees, RV fees. We knew it wouldn't work for long. We said so, and it didn't work. It was perhaps a lucky break for us that in the same week we voted to close parks, the Legislative Emergency Board authorized spending hundreds of millions of dollars for 10 new prisons. This was a sad commentary on Oregon in the 1990s, and it was not overlooked by the media or the public. Any number of persons told me they could hear Tom McCall turning over and over in his grave. As you know, at the request of the E-Board, we postponed the closures, and the E-Board in November authorized $1.8 million to keep parks open through this month. Obviously, the E-Board help was only a finger in the dike, and since last summer, we've dedicated our energies to seeking stable funding to keep our parks open, to repair and rebuild our deteriorating facilities, and expand the system. We held public forums around the state. The media discovered the parks issue after all these years. Television highlighted our deteriorating facilities, and editorials from Astoria to Ashland supported us. Thousands of new volunteers showed up to work in our parks and help out. And for the first time in history, the 1977 legislature formed committees on parks, and in his budget message, Governor Kitzhaber proposed a fund for stabilizing the park system, and during the session, Senator Brady Adams and Speaker Lynn Lundquist pledged their support for accomplishing long-term stable funding before adjournment. So probably for the first time in Oregon history, our three top leaders have pledged their support for state parks. Well, the legislature has not adjourned, as I'm sure you know, but we do have reason to be optimistic for the first time in decades. The good news is that there will almost certainly be funds to operate state parks for the next 2 years. It looks like we'll receive an increase in general funds that will allow us to maintain the current level of basic services to the public, as well, hopefully, as a funding through a bond issue to start on our backlog of repairs and renovation. The bad news, though, is that it appears there'll be no stable funding package to ensure continued park operations and to allow us to leave a parks legacy for the future. In her song, which she called Lost Your Head Blues, Bessie Smith sang, "Once ain't for always, and two ain't but twice." Well, I don't think Bessie was singing about parks, but her words still apply. For state parks to be in Oregon's future, once or twice ain't enough. Parks need stable funding, not a quick fix once or twice a decade. History shows us that parks cannot regularly compete successfully in the legislature for general funds, especially after the passage of Measure 5. So we've come a long way, keeping my fingers crossed that's what the legislature will do, but we're not there yet. I hope that this weekend parks stable funding will be on the agenda at the budget meetings with the governor and the legislative leaders. I hope they will take some action, or at the very least, move forward with a plan to address stable funding in the near future. Today I wanted to remind you how Oregon got its great park system and beaches, comment on how the withdrawal of state funding in the 80s and 90s affected us, try to answer those who say we should privatize our parks, and point out why I believe it's crucial to save, improve, and expand our park system, and say what it will take to do that. To begin with some history, Oregon's been fortunate and perhaps unique in having men and women of vision who have realized that our scenic and natural heritage should be saved for future generation, and who took action at the right time to ensure a balance between nature and development. First, the beaches. We have all 362 miles of our ocean beaches or public recreation areas under the control of the Parks Department. By contrast, only 5% of the coastline in the United States that's available for recreation is in public hands. Only 90 miles of California's 1,000 miles are in public hands. You wonder why people from California come here? In Oregon, all of us, and not just the privileged few, can enjoy and use the beaches. And this came about because of the efforts of Governor Oz West back in 1913, followed up in 1966 with the Beach Bill, whose leaders were Governor Tom McCall, Robert Straub, Parks Director Dave Talbot, Parks Advisory Chairman Stubb Stewart, who was a legislature. These men and women deserve our eternal praise for their successful efforts to save our beaches. Our park system, our jewel of a park system, 225 parks, whose acreage constitutes only about half of Crater Lake National Park, came about because of the efforts of people like Robert Sawyer of Bend, and R.A. Booth in Eugene, Henry Van Duzer, Jesse Honeyman, who founded the Oregon Roadside Council. They were concerned about the destruction of trees along Oregon highways in the 20s. They were unable to get parks legislation through, but they got legislation through. Governor Ben Olcott, who happened to be West's brother-in-law, got legislation through to allow the acquisition of scenic areas along the highways. In 1929, they decided to have one person be in charge of parks. That person was Sam Boardman, and the rest is history. During the next 21 years, he virtually created our park system. And when he retired, we had 181 parks. He did this in the middle of the Depression with little funds, with little staff. He was often criticized for wasting the little money that he did have. He turned out to be probably the greatest real estate investor in Oregon history, but he invested for the public and not for himself. Some examples. He acquired the 2,400-acre Oswald West State Park, which we know is Short Sands Park, for a grand total of $90,000. About one-third of the, well, it would be about one-third, I guess, the cost of an oceanfront lot today. Cape Lookout State Park was his favorite, I think. 1,400 acres, magnificent park, $16,000. Ecola State Park, he got for gifts and cash of $17,500. Today, the adjoining lots are offered for sale for $500,000 to $1 million. Boardman left some good advice for us. He said, build when your sinews are young, build before time makes your recreational heritage prohibitive through cost, husband that which you have, build unto that which you would preserve. When we drive along the Coast Highway or the Columbia Gorge today, we should say a prayer, I think, for Oz West, Ben Olcott, Sam Boardman, and their supporters for saving the best of Oregon for us. But if Oz West and Sam Boardman can come back today, I'm sure they'd look at our crowded freeways, our urban sprawl, our congested cities, and be amazed by Oregon's growth. They would look at the scores of new golf courses, destination resorts, and would probably ask to see our new parks. They'd be staggered to learn that Oregon has not added a significant new campground since the early 1970s. Back when Bill Walton was playing for the Trailblazers, John Kitzhaber was in medical school, and Nike was just starting its business around a running track in Eugene. They'd be dismayed to learn that we need to fund $110 million of deferred renovation and rehabilitation in our parks, and that the buildings constructed by the CCCs under Boardman's direction in the 30s and 40s have leaky roofs, substandard sewer systems, and rotting cabin walls. Oz West would undoubtedly ask why, if our beaches are public, have we allowed gated and walled private communities along the coast that make beach access difficult or impossible for the public? Well, we'd have to tell Governor West and Mr. Boardman that in 1980, a legislative-sponsored measure to remove parks funding from the gas tax was passed. That took away our historic source of funding. Then came Measure 5 and Measure 11, and Oregon was in its, what Governor Kitzhaber calls our policy of disinvestment. Certainly parks, I think, was the first example of Oregon's policy of disinvestment. Saving the parks has been on the discussion table now by conferences and committees and commissions since the 1980s. Everyone agrees we need stable funding, we need additional funds for our parks. Governor Neil Goldschmidt tried to implement the 2010 plan developed in 1988 to raise over $200 million for state parks. He was unable to do so, but he did appoint a Parks Commission to take over from the Transportation Department, parks operations, and become the advocate for parks. The commission has worked hard in the department to keep our parks open despite the lack of state support. We've increased user fees till they're among the highest in the nation, used over 30,000 volunteers as well as inmate crews, raised funds from the private sector through a foundation, entered into partnerships with local parks and groups, subcontracted out certain work with local businesses, deferred more and more repairs and renovation, reduced staff, cut millions of dollars from already slim budget, transferred parks to local government. Until last summer, we got by, barely, with a little help for our friends. But it wasn't enough. We didn't have any options left. We felt that we had done everything we could. We announced the park closures. We weren't even sure we'd meet our next payroll. Parks Department is not allowed to borrow money. When we announced the proposed closures, we heard from some park users, citizens, and public officials who said, you don't need to close parks. You're wasting money. Just cut down on your expenditures. Close restrooms. Put up portable toilets. Use volunteers to do all the maintenance. Don't worry about upkeep of trails, buildings, and cabins. We disagreed. Oregon State Parks have a great reputation, well-deserved over many years for their beauty, safety, and cleanliness. We may be the only part of state government that gets fan mail from all over the world, at least until recently. That's why we determined not to allow our park system to deteriorate anymore. We didn't want to ruin the reputation that was developed over many years by our employees with pride in their work. So we rejected more of the Band-Aid approach. We determined to keep parks open only so long as we could take care of those parks in a first-class manner, and we agreed that we would close parks if we didn't get funds until Salem listened to us. Fortunately, the 1977 legislature has been listening to the public on parks. Now, those of us who cherish our beaches and parks may find it hard to believe that in 1997 it's still necessary to debate whether the state should even have a role in providing parks for its citizens. But that's where we are. It is an issue in Salem with many legislators about whether the state has a role in recreation and parks. Some say Oregon can't afford parks in the 1990s. They conveniently overlook the fact that our park system came about and was supported in the middle of the Depression. Certainly, we all know, especially this group, the tremendous demands of the legislature today for education funding, corrections, human resources, healthcare, transportation. But we can have a park system that meets today and tomorrow's needs without seriously jeopardizing major state programs. Unlike these other priorities, the dollars required to maintain a quality park system are of a totally different magnitude. Supporting parks is and has been a matter of government priorities, not a lack of government resources. The Parks Department needs a stable funding source of an additional $20 million per biennium, roughly $3 per Oregonian per year, or the cost of a hot dog and a soft drink, unless you're the Rose Garden, which would be 10 times that. But this is a bargain for taxpayers. It's equal to a tiny fraction of 1% of the current $10 billion general fund budget. A 1 cent increase in the bottle deposit would more than do it. Some critics say that parks are only recreation and that the state shouldn't be involved at all. Well, parks provide recreation opportunities for all of us, but they are much more. They are the cornerstone of Oregon's tourism industry and a key factor in economic development. Brochures featuring photos of parks are used by state agencies to attract tourists and new business. And if you look at those brochures, the sun is always shining. Intel and other companies tell us that quality of life attracts them to Oregon. State parks are Oregon's largest tourist attraction. Park visitors spend approximately $550 million annually and bolster the economies of communities hit by the decline of resource industries. In the rush of our rapid development, Oregon's beginning to look more and more like our sprawling neighbors to the north and south. We're seeing special places disappear, and many recreational opportunities in the private sector are being priced out of the market for the average citizen. A state policy that seeks more business to move to Oregon, and indeed subsidizes them to move here, and that seeks more tourists to visit, doesn't make sense if the state continues to ignore parks. These contradictory policies will ruin the very quality of life that makes Oregon attractive to business and tourists and to all of us. University of Oregon economist Ed Whitelaw has said it well. An attractive environment is money in the bank. Don't throw it away for a quick binge and a long, long hangover. In Oregon, we have not yet spent our inheritance, as California and Washington is in the process of doing. In competition with our neighbors north and south, a superior environment is our principal advantage. Last month, for a very, very brief period of time, privatization was raised as the answer to the parks problem in the legislature. This was our second lucky break. Just as in 1967, when the legislature appeared ready to kill the beach bill, the public was heard loud and clear when privatization came up. They wanted nothing to do with it. The proposal to offer for sale or rent parks that did not show a profit wouldn't save state parks. It would dismantle our state park system. The proposal represents a serious misunderstanding of the history and purpose of state parks and the causes for the financial problems they have faced in the last decade. Our mission is to provide and protect outstanding sites for the enjoyment of future and present generation. Our mission is not to make a profit on each property or close it down. While this commission sits, we don't plan to charge Oregonians to walk on the beach, hike our trails, or fish our rivers, or let anyone else do it. State parks can't be equated to private campgrounds. Oregon parks are much more than campgrounds. Only about 20% of our parks have campgrounds, and our day use visitors outnumber campers 20-1. The campground revenues not only have to cover the campgrounds, but to pay the expenses of hundreds of other parks and sites, beach accesses, trails, scenic rivers, and recreational and historic sites that make our system unique. Private operators do not have similar obligations or our stewardship responsibility to preserve and protect natural sites for future generations. If we had to make a profit on each property or close it down, our beaches and parks would have been sold off long ago, and Oregon would not be Oregon. But perhaps the main reason to support parks goes beyond economic factors. It's a selfish one. It's why most of us live here. I'm sure all of you have a favorite park or a favorite place at the beach with memories for your family and why it's important and what Oregon's all about. Oregon is a special state, which once had a tradition of spending adequate tax money to preserve its beauty and natural resources for the enjoyment of all its citizens. We need to revive this tradition as one of state policy and make sure that what Tom McCall called the Oregon story is still alive. Parks are also Oregon's history. Wendell Berry said, if you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are. No place is a place until things that happened in it are remembered. Oregon's history is in our park. 90 parks, 95 different Native American sites, the Oregon Trail, the birthplace of our state, gold mining, timber, our farming heritage, lighthouses, missions, military bases, stagecoach stops. They all tell the story of Oregon. And parks preserve natural areas and save what is unique and special about Oregon. They are probably our most effective means of land use planning. Think what the Oregon coast would look like without our 68 state parks along the beaches. William Kittredge, who grew up in southeastern Oregon, said it well in his book, Hole in the Sky. He said, we must make use of the place where we live without killing it. And we must understand that the living world cannot be replicated. There will never be another setup like the one in which we have thrived. Ruin it, and we will ruin it, and we will have lost ourselves, and that is craziness. Parks funding is a nonpartisan and non-political issue. Republicans and Democrats have ignored parks, and Republicans and Democrats have supported parks. Parks are democratic. They're open to everyone. At a time of widening income disparity among our citizens, they are a rare example of government spending that benefits all of us. They preserve what is beautiful and what is real and provide benefits to the health and well-being of every member of our society and every generation. Indeed, Edward Abbey once said that as far as he was concerned, parks are about the only nice, friendly thing that government does for ordinary people. And I keep telling the legislators that parks is one thing that Oregon has done right. It's a wonderful investment that's paid off. Why stop funding it now? The people have long been ahead of the politicians in support of the parks. Polls show that over 80% of the citizens have a favorable impression of state parks and want to support them. As you know, the voters here in Portland and metro area supported parks measures. Oregon historian Stuart Holbrook and Tom McCall did their best to deter Oregon growth and stop people from moving here. But we now know we can't keep people from coming to Oregon, even if we wanted to. But perhaps we could sleep better at night knowing that as Oregon grows, our state parks will be available for our new residents and visitors, as well as for ourselves, our children and grandchildren. With a $20 million stable funding package, we could leave a parks legacy for the future. It means being able to make opportunistic purchases of properties. It means new camping facilities at existing parks and building new campgrounds in areas that don't have them. It means completing the missing links in the Oregon Coast Trail. It means developing more access points to the beach and being able to provide public access when destination resorts and major condominium developments crop up along the coast. It means providing interpretation in our parks to educate visitors as to wildlife, natural history, and Oregon history. It means keeping our fees affordable to Oregonians. Many states don't even have day use fees. And very few states have camping fees as high as Oregon. And it means eliminating general fund support, which would free up more funds for education. We've been enjoying a park system that was put into place over 50 years ago, and now it's our turn to provide for the next 50 years. This type of spending for parks is an investment in Oregon. It is a gift from all Oregonians of the present to all Oregonians of the present and the future. We've enjoyed the gifts of our predecessors, and it's time for us, this generation, to step forward and make its gifts. It's our turn. The late Northwest poet Richard Hugo entitled one of his poems, "What Thou Lovest Well Remains American." Change one word. What thou lovest well remains Oregon. What does it mean to love well? It means to cherish, to show affection, to take care of. If we love well our parks, take care of and preserve our parks and beaches, and make our park facilities worthy of their natural surroundings, and if we acquire selected new park areas, save additional recreational and natural areas from development, and provide more beach and river access, then Oregon will remain Oregon. The Oregon of Oz West, Sam Boardman, and Tom McCall, and there will be a great park system in Oregon's future, and I believe our children and grandchildren who follow us will be grateful. But if we do not soon put into place a method for stable funding for parks, then history tells us that the political establishment is unlikely to come up with and provide the necessary funding. Our existing parks will deteriorate because of overuse, and acquiring new parks and new park properties will become prohibitive. The Oregon of the future may have a world-class light rail system, an electronics industry second only to the Silicon Valley, freeways stretching to every corner of the state, and first-class education, health care, and correction systems. But if we haven't loved well our parks, we may as well live someplace else other than Oregon. We will still have a state named Oregon, but it will no longer remain Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. You mentioned, and I want to reiterate, that the voters, at least in Portland and the metro region, have done an excellent job in the last few years, both with a city parks bond measure to deal with some deferred maintenance, $58.8 million, and it was passed by a glowing 70%. So I think for the maintenance, the deferred maintenance, we could do that with a bond measure. I would be interested to find out from you what the commission has discovered, what other states are doing for their stable maintenance of parks that you were referring to.
Well, other states are doing pretty well. They came to Oregon and learned what a great park system we had, and have gone back, have tried to emulate it. I think over 25 states have stable funding or dedicated funding sources for state parks. Among those are Washington and California, Arizona, New York, Missouri, I believe, quite a few. It's quite a contrast to when Sam Boardman was here. Boardman was so aggressive that he entered into an agreement to acquire Beacon Rock as a state park. And why is that interesting? Well, Beacon Rock is not in Oregon. Beacon Rock is in Washington. And he was ready to close on that. And Oregon would be the first state in the union to have a state park in another state. And Washingtonians got so embarrassed that they went to the governor and reversed it.
I'm Don Sterling, a member of the City Club. Brian, one of the suggestions that we hear is that we should use convicts to maintain the state parks. Would you comment on the ramifications of that?
Well, the state parks has used convicts, I guess the correct term is inmates, for many, many years for all types of projects. And we included in our budget a proposal this session to use inmates on a grander scale than ever before to work both within the walls and outside. And in the walls they would be building tables and benches and barbecue pits and all types of furniture and things we need in parks. And outside they would be building trails, cleaning up parks, etc. We didn't get all the funding we wanted for that. Of course, the legislature, again, hasn't acted finally, but it appears that we will get some funding to use inmates on a larger scale than ever before. So we are definitely using inmates. Inmates are not the answer to the park's financial problem, however. We can make use of inmates, but the whole correction issue is another topic, another topic, but we cannot allow inmates that aren't qualified to hold administrative jobs and other jobs involving public safety any more than they're qualified to work for the legislators who constantly ask me about why we don't use more inmates.
Brian, Greg Chalet, City Club member. You've convinced me, and I want to thank you for your hard work. It's not been easy for you. Could you tell me what your 2 or 3 preferred sources of dedicated revenue are for the parks, and which one you think is most likely to succeed? And then second, what we can do to help you get attention down in Salem for securing that dedicated source?
I don't really, I'm not passing the laws, and I'm not a politician. The dedicated, the governor suggested I think 2 cents beverage charge, 1 cent of which would go to parks and 1 cent to the fish restoration. Fish restoration money came elsewhere, and the parks part is lingering. A penny added on to the deposit would produce $20 to $30 million a year. and it would solve our stable funding package as long as we get the other legislation through, which we're hoping to. When we traveled around the state last summer, we asked the citizens that question. And I think, as I recall, the lottery, a percentage of the lottery was very high on their list. Beverage tax was high. Increasing the car registration fee, license fee, and using part of those proceeds was very high. That was also suggested by a committee appointed by Speaker Lundquist, but that requires a constitutional amendment and gets into some complications and the opposition of the highway lobby. Those, I think, are the three that I've heard mentioned the most. It's not a lot of money. Well, the other part of your question was what can the citizens do? I think the citizens can talk to the legislators and talk to the media and just keep the drum beat up that we need stable funding for parks and that it's a bargain, it's a great investment, and it's important to our way of life. And ask our leaders who have made a commitment to live up to their pledge. The governor, the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate have got involved, and they are committed to stable funding. I don't envy their position. They're under tremendous political pressure from education and health care and corrections, and money is tight. But I think we need the kind of imaginative leadership to solve this problem, and I think there are people in Salem who can do it.
Brian, Steve Shell, member. First of all, I'd like to commend you for your leadership in this area. You've been very outspoken, and I think it's a real pride to see the tradition of Oregon continued in the citizen involvement, as you've indicated. Two questions, really. The first question has to do with breaking out the funding that Greg mentioned. It seems to me that there are problems of refurbishing the parks, there are problems of ongoing maintenance, and there are problems of acquisition. Do we need different funding sources for each, and how might we break that out in a way that makes some sense? Second question is more parochial. Can you talk a little bit about completion of the Oregon Coast Trail and access to the beach?
The first one was what funds should be used to finance our needs. It looks like, Steve, that the legislature will pass a bonding measure for the first time for state parks. And it would authorize $105 million of bonds over a 7 biennium series, which would provide $15 million of bonding each biennium. And it would allow that to be used for renovation and repairs and also acquisitions. So that's a really good start. Now, we already have a $100 million repair and renovation bill, but we couldn't do it all at once anyway. But if that bill passes, and Representative Randall Edwards of Portland has certainly been a leader in that, and I commend him for efforts. I think that would be a way to develop new park properties, repair, and renovate our parks. Most of the states that have stable funding rely on the lottery or bond issues. And so it looks like we're starting to get there. As far as operating funds, we get, 71% of our $30 million right now from our day use fees, camping fees, and RV fees. So we have a good cash flow from that, and will continue to increase as long as we can build more campgrounds. So I think our fees plus whatever our stable funding mechanism is to help build for our future legacy is the other part of the picture. Combination of bonds, fees, and a dedicated funding. The other question was the beach access, of which you're an expert on, and I'm not. Completion of the Oregon Coast Trail, which is what was a dream started by an Oregon State professor, Dickey, years and years ago, I believe. Is that right? I think so. Yeah. We have almost no money for trails, as you know. We have one person assigned part-time to handle trails in the entire state. So it's on our drawing board, and all we need are funds to work on it. As far as beach access, that's an issue that very much concerns me. We are seeing condominiums, resorts, and subdivisions being built with walled-off gates so the public can't reach the beaches. We have no legal authority to stop that. We've sought legislation this year just to keep people from closing down existing public accesses. We couldn't even get that out of committee. I think Oregon should seek legislation by like Hawaii that would provide on these large developments. The developer has to provide access to the beach, or we'll see less and less public access. And what we'll also see is more and more pressure to allow driving on the beaches, because when you can't get to the beach, the argument is we ought to be able to go way down here and get on and then drive up. So I think that's an important issue that needs to be addressed.
Dan Goldie. Brian, the state has never seen a period of time when the economy has been booming more than it is now, and things generally are more prosperous. We have close to full employment, or more than that maybe. What is the basic problem that confronts a state that would take one of its prime economic and cultural assets and let it deteriorate? What do you think the fundamental problem is?
Well, that's what I say when I go before the various legislative hearings. I tried to indicate some of that in my talk. I think it's Measure 5 and the tremendous demand for general fund money for education, health care, corrections, etc. And that's coupled with an opposition to anything that sounds like new tax. And so that doesn't leave us many places to go. So I think we need a champion in the legislature, or champions, who will make this an important issue. And there aren't many of those, quite frankly, right now.
I want to ask you a question.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Brian a question also. You mentioned that you thought that we should be building new parks. I'd be interested in knowing what some of the new parks are that you think might be built, if that's possible. And secondly, I'd be interested in knowing a little more about the Oregon Parks Commission, what the authority is of the Oregon Parks Commission, and what your group, in fact, can do to bring some of this off.
Okay, last question. First, the Parks Commission was formed in 1990, as I mentioned. It's a 7-person commission appointed by the governor. It includes representatives from each congressional district, requires 1 person to be west of the Coast Range and 1 person to be a resident east of the Coast Range. We have authority to set policy for the Parks Department, acquire property, appoint the director, and we have visualized our role as advocates for state parks. I think after gas tax funding stopped in 1980, it was difficult for the Department of Transportation to play that role, and it was difficult for the parks employees in the Department of Transportation to play that role. So I think what we've done is try to raise the visibility of parks, the importance of parks, and we've hold meetings all over the state, and everywhere we go, I think we're impressed with what Boardman and West and others have done, how fortunate we are. Now, what was your first question?
What new parks do you think we might?
Oh, we have a long list of new parks. You know, I would have to, a new park, we'd like to have new parks. You'd be surprised, and maybe wouldn't be surprised, at how many people want to leave us a park or want to give us a bargain purchase. How many businesses? People are concerned about Oregon's heritage and their relationship to it. we don't have funds to accept some of those gifts now. And we've had to turn down some marvelous gifts just because we don't have the operating funds even to hang on to those properties. But we have a list of properties that I'd rather not disclose publicly because developers might be listening. And another issue that's sort of subsidiary to what people have said here is that because we have so many great parks, we're seeing developers come up and build right next to our parks and use our parks as the amenities for their guests and for their residents, and in some cases change the character of the park. So we really have no defense to that right now. It's sort of a matter of local and planning decisions, and that's something that we are working on and would like to get LCDC and the type of protection that forests and farmland have, so that we can be at the table when these developments go up and get concessions from developers and preserve and protect the integrity and the resources of our parks. We're allowing some people to get very rich just because they buy property next to parks, and in some cases there are people flocking to our parks and use them just as if it's part of the resort.
Sterling again. Along with the squeeze that your Parks Commission has been feeling, I have the understanding that the federal parks, such as the ones the Forest Service and the BLM run, are also being squeezed. Are you feeling a backlash from that?
Well, the federal parks financial situation, as far as I know, is a little bit different situation. The federal parks get over 90% of their funding from the taxpayers. We get 8%. They are going into fees at this time, and probably they're behind us in charging fees many places. They've used concessionaires, and there's been a lot of controversy about whether they make enough money off concessionaires. There's no doubt that national parks have a huge backlog of deferred maintenance and needs for renovation. But they've also had a more supportive Congress and more supportive presidents. I think there have been big increases in their budgets. But the Forest Service, I'm not as familiar with, but I'm sure we all know they are having to raise fees and charging for more and more outdoor activities.
I'm Brian Posowitz. I'm a City Club member. I have 3 questions that I wanted to ask you.
One, we're doing back in the office?
Yeah, right. One is with respect to the bond measure that you think will be approved. Will those bonds be repaid with general fund revenues? Number 2, with respect to the Parks Commission, is there any disagreement on the commission itself, or is everyone thinking along the same lines? My third question is, has there been any discussion about trying to solve the problem by initiative as opposed to trying to persuade the legislature?
The first question was what now? What was the first one? Oh, bonds. Okay. The bonds, the way the legislation is drafted, will be paid out of lottery funds. Are there disagreements among the commission? Yeah, we've had some 4-3 votes. We've had tie votes, but I think on we got some pretty controversial issues. I mean, driving on the beach, concessionaires in the parks, who's going to be allowed to build on a scenic river and how far, who's going to be allowed to build on a beach, should somebody be allowed to rent trikes and bikes at Seaside? So we get some pretty close calls. But as far as getting adequate parks funding, there's no disagreement at all. There was I guess on the closures, one commissioner felt we should have closed the parks sooner than we did. We didn't actually close. One commissioner felt we definitely should have closed the parks and not waited for the e-boards, $1.8 million in November of 1996. And your third question, Ryan? Yeah, I think on initiatives, I think there has been some discussion in the House to submit a bottle bill proposal to people. I guess my feeling is we elect legislators to make those decisions and not just to bounce them out to us. We did in 1992, bring two initiatives, two referrals to people. One would be to get parks back on the gas tax. That was a Battle of the Waterloo type situation. We went down very badly. The other was a bonding measure, and that, I think it was $175 million. That lost very closely, carried in the metropolitan areas and the Willamette Valley areas, as I recall, and lost in the rest of the state. There have been, there is a working group that off and on the last 2 years that has been considering an initiative measure to raise funds for parks, natural areas, wildlife. A number of the environmental organizations have been involved, and I think it may well be that that will come about in the next year or two. There's a feeling among a lot of us that if we're going to do an initiative or go to the voters, it'd be better to have it drafted outside than in the legislature. So that may be coming about.
That's it.
Okay, I agree.
Thank you. What's yours?
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Gary. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for your comments about parks in Oregon. I think you've created some advocates for this important cause, and hopefully many of us will find ways to speak out in support of this issue. And we thank you also for all the other things that you've done for us in the state of Oregon. So thank you for coming today, and we stand adjourned.